Hands down, he was Superman from day one.
I realized that if I could pull off this part, it would change my life.
John Houseman said, Mr. Reeve, it is very important to become a serious classical actor. Unless, of course, they offer you a load of money to do something else.
I'd love to hear a little bit about sort of the inception of the project and why you decided it was the right time to make this documentary.
A few years ago, I received a cold email from an archive specialist in the UK called Daniel Kilroy, who's listed as one of the EPs on the film. And he asked if we had home movies from our family and from our childhood, and if we'd ever thought about doing a biodoc. And we talked amongst ourselves. It also, coincidentally, we had just boxed up our family home and so that we kind of knew what we had, and we knew where it was. And it was terribly labeled, all sorts of formats. Fast forward, he went to a production company, to Passion Pictures, and they came on board. And after that, they brought on Ian and Peter and introduced us to them. And we had some Zoom calls, and they met in person in New York a couple of years ago, and here we are. And that's how it came to be. And yeah.
Ian, Peter, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about sort of when you were approached by the family. How did you initially start thinking about sort of the structure of the project?
I mean, we weren't approached by the family.
Yeah,
we were approached by Passion Pictures, with whom we'd made Rising Phoenix, with Ian and Dee's production company, Misfits Entertainment. And the moment that we heard about this project, we'd taken quite a long time since Rising Phoenix to choose our next film we would work on. This took like a nanosecond. We thought we have to do everything we possibly can to work on this, because it was a very meaningful story to us from the get-go, not even knowing the inside story, but having kind of, from my point of view, grown up with Chris as Superman and then learning about his advocacy after the accident. It just seemed like such a strong story to tell. So we jumped in, and we had the series of calls and meetings over, I guess, a 6-month period. And that was it. We were on board. In terms of the structure, we were very aware from the beginning that it'd be all too easy to make a linear film where you have Chris before the accident and then the accident and then Chris after the accident, and that just never seemed appealing. Yeah. Not least of all because when Chris wrote his own absolutely beautiful memoir, Still Me, he had sort of like pointed the way to us a little bit in terms of starting with the accident and then kind of flashing back, as it were, in literary form to his life before the accident. So that was something we really wanted to follow, and it was just a question of finding a cinematic way to do that, really.
You mentioned that you had all this archival material, but it was poorly labeled. What was the process of sort of, going through that, and sort of, did you hand it over? Were you sort of involved in that process?
We knew what we had once we sort of figured it out, and it was a great help to have this archivist extra help us. And then once we were on board with Ian and Peter's vision and believed in Passion Pictures and our friends at Words and Pictures run by Connor Schell, we handed over our stuff, said do what you want with it. We agreed to sit each individually for the interviews that you saw on screen, and then we let them go do their thing. We trusted them, and our trust, in our opinion, has been richly rewarded. We didn't ever want to put our hands or our thumb on the scale, because we knew that it needed to be a holistic, comprehensive, unflinching view of a very human story and a human family. And to have us trying to dictate it would not have been appropriate, or what any of us or our family, our parents, would have wanted. So we said, here's a bunch of stuff. I think you'll figure out what's what pretty quickly, and go make it.
Alexandra, when you were looking through the footage before sort of handing it over, I mean, what was that experience like for you, and then watching it, on screen?
If I give you full disclosure here, we didn't actually watch everything before we handed over to them. It was that level of trust that we were going to just hand over what we had. And as Matthew said, some of it was in a format that we couldn't even figure out how to see it. But what that meant is that we sat for these interviews, we agreed to participate as part of the film, but we saw this a couple weeks before it got submitted to Sundance, was the first time that we saw this film. And so not only were we seeing this beautiful creation that they had put together, but we were seeing family footage that we'd either never seen before or hadn't seen in decades. And so I remember so clearly, they're joining us over pandemic year, they're joining us over Zoom, saying, well, what did you make of the film? And my first reaction was, I just got 90 minutes with my family again. So it was a total gift. And it's a gift that keeps giving. I have children now, Matthew has children now. They're seeing Dana sing for the first time when they get to see clips of this film. It's amazing.
Peter and Ian, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about sort of these, as you said, the beautiful use of of animation and sort of incorporating that throughout the film. Can you talk a little bit about that?
The way we make our non-fiction films, we obviously use interviews and we use archive. And as you know, archive comes in all shape and forms. So we want to create some sort of visuals that give first an identity to the film. The film used a lot of clips from the Superman years, so there's already a strong visual identity, but we wanted to reappropriate that. So our idea was to actually create a Christopher. How can you try to, as an able-bodied person, to actually put yourself in a mind with someone who's got, who's quadriplegic? So we felt that the idea of Chris being trapped within his own body was a bit the idea behind it. And we actually sculpted it in a way that if you look at it going down, it looked like he could be falling and trying to break his fall, or if he was going up, he's trying to reach for the sky. And then the idea of the sort of universe or world he's inhabiting, that sculpture, is basically, as Superman, he inhabited space, he comes from space, and with all the issues in spinal cord, it's actually a representation of inside the spinal cord, and we're creating that world. So the sculpture is within that world. And then with all his work with the foundation and trying to move the needle within the world of scientific research and stem cells, we actually looked at how the stem cells are. So again, you have a scene where the stem cells spread out. And the way we do it with Peter, we generally use them as a title sequence, and then we keep on using it throughout the film to express different version and feelings. But this and the music are two of the things that we try to use to create our own stamp on the non-fiction world that a lot of other filmmakers inhabit.
I was wondering if you could talk about sort of the process of sitting for the interviews and what that was like, talking about your father in this way.
Once we agreed to do the project and to work with Ian and Peter, we talked amongst ourselves and we all agreed unanimously that we would give all of ourselves to it, say the things we hadn't said publicly before, share the stories we hadn't shared before. So in some extent, it was kind of a cathartic experience. It was like, I don't know, maybe a long therapy session of some kind. Yeah, but more importantly, it was very powerful and emotional and rewarding to hear my siblings tell their stories. And those are the moments in the film that still hit me the hardest when I watch it. But it was good too, but we wanted it to be as authentic and accurate as possible. So we all wanted to just be as honest as possible.
Yeah. I will say for me, so I'm an advocate. I got my dad's advocacy gene. I'm used to when you speak for an interview, you're doing it because you're trying to prove a point, and you have to be really succinct and land your soundbite and move on. So it was a really big deal to sit and do that type of long-form interview and move past the soundbite to actually exploring the themes that we did. And I went in thinking, I'm doing a narration job here, right? They need some people that are going to just help move the story along. I actually remember a conversation that you and I had where we gamed out the amount of time we thought the movie would probably be and the number of people we knew they were speaking to. And we thought, okay, this means that we're going to get like 5 minutes, maybe max. And again, I'm like, okay, so the soundbite I'm trying to land is that, we had a whole plan going in. But that's such a beautiful result that came instead, because instead of it being this linear film that's just, again, traditional, bio story, just telling it where we're moving the narrative along, what we realized is they were connecting to these really universal themes, right? Like what it is to be a parent, what it is to have a hard parent, like my dad did with his own dad, and early versions of our dad was pretty tough too, and that comes across in the movie, right? So like what it is to connect with a parent, what it is to connect with a spouse, and particularly as those marriage vows get pushed to the ultimate extreme, and those tender, the tender relationship, exploring the divorce and giving equal treatment to our mom and kind of allowing that to be a full love story. And then you take the beat and then you see the beautiful love story that is Dad and Dana. Again, it's a real testament to the two of you.
When we to bring us back to the beginning of when we were discussing as a trio, did we want to do this? We agreed pretty quickly that if we were indeed going to participate and go on this journey, that this would be the forum in which we would access the deepest recesses of our story that we might not otherwise have shared publicly. And I will have forever seared in my brain the memory of my experience the night before sitting for my interview. I was going in to sit for my interview here in New York, which was in January of 2023. I figured I need to get into the right headspace because this interview will be the time that I go places that I've never actually gone before, even in therapy. And I want to, as scary as it might be. And as I'm flipping through my mom's journals, just to make sure I'm getting facts and dates right and ensuring that I have the right sense of what she was going through, because it was essential to me that her story be told, and they did a wonderful, magnificent job of that. This piece of loose leaf fell out of one of the journals, and I picked it up and noticed immediately that it was a poem that she had written 5 years to the day of our dad's injury. And that's the poem you hear me read in the film. I'm so glad that we each went there in our interviews because we knew we gave them enough to make something, and they did.
I'm going to tell you something you don't know.
Please.
I told your father he got the part.
What? Stand up and tell us everything.
I got a call from the producer. I was the publicist at Rogers & Cowan. I got a call from Salkin saying we've cast Superman, and I got him a photo shoot with Scavullo, who was the hottest at the time. I call up, a man answers the phone. I said, "Are you Christopher Reeve?" "Yes." I said, "I'd like to try to schedule a time today to take a photo shoot at Scavullo." He said, "What? What do you..." I mean, he had no sense. The next thing I said was, "Have you spoken to your agent today?" And he said, "No." And I said, "You got the part of Superman." I worked on all the films. I adored your mother. I adored your mother. We all did. And I was on the board of the Creative Coalition. Your dad was the president. I knew him very well. I've never told it before.
Wow.
Never.
And once again, you see that we Muppets directors that we should have interviewed this lady. We failed again.
Make a sequel.
Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you.